Daniel Shay's rebellion really raised eyebrows, and up to the point of where, okay, we're going to need a stronger frame of government. We're going to need to meet first in Annapolis, which didn't go so well, but upon Daniel Shay's rebellion, now a constitutional convention would happen in Philadelphia in the summer of 1787 that would change the way the central government was able to function and would define certain roles. One of the most ardent supporters of a stronger central government is Alexander Hamilton. He's the dude on the $10 bill. Okay. There's also a popular Broadway show called Hamilton, which is based off of his life and his legacy and the framing of the United States government and his importance as a founding father. Alexander Hamilton was a successful New York lawyer, but really he was the illegitimate child of a Scottish tradesman in a Caribbean island, and he would eventually make his way, starting really from nothing, into the United States, and made his way into having his name and his face printed on dollar bills, $10 bills. So, of all the founding fathers, there are two that really stand out. Alexander Hamilton's one of them. The other one is my favorite, Benjamin Franklin. Both of them have a self-made story, and they show what's possible if you're willing to work and do various different things to show that you don't have to come from money to be moneyed or to live what's deemed now as the American dream. You don't have to come from some aristocratic background to be very wealthy and successful in this country. Back then, that extended really just to white men, so he had that going for him. Nowadays, the true aim should be for all of us to have that sort of opportunity, regardless of race, ethnicity, color, gender, whichever have you. Okay, we should all have that opportunity. But it had to start somewhere, and in the context of the time, it was important for James Madison, or rather, we're going to get to him in a second, Alexander Hamilton, to piece things together. Now, some important things came into play. One, there had to have been a belief in a balance of powers, and it would be deemed necessary that the Constitution would frame three different aspects of government: legislature, executive, and judiciary. Legislative being Congress as we know it, executive, a president, we'll talk about that in a little bit, and third, the Supreme Court. Okay? We're going to talk first about legislature. Currently, Congress is comprised of two chambers: the Senate, which is the upper chamber, and the lower chamber, which is the House of Representatives. It's not all that different than what you see in British Parliament with the House of Lords and House of Commons. Basically, the modern day United States Senate is comprised of 100 senators, 2 from every state. You could be from Wyoming, the least populous state in the country. You could be from California, the most populous state. Each one's going to have 2. We'll talk about reasons for a second. The House of Representatives, the lower house, is comprised of 435 representatives, and the number of representatives for each state depends on the population. So if you are a more populous state, such as California or Texas or Florida or New York, you're going to have more reps. If you're a lesser populous state, like Wyoming, you're going to have fewer reps. So the idea at the time in this divided convention was, what do we do about legislature? We are all in the consensus that we believe that there needs to be a stronger form of central government. We cannot tax people. We cannot raise income. We need something stronger. There were divisions about how to get there. Enter James Madison, a wealthy Virginia legislator who agreed that Alexander Hamilton was right in calling for a stronger central government. And he laid out an idea that was reminiscent of the Virginia legislature, in that we should have in our country, under a Virginia plan, as he labeled it, the idea that we should have 2 chambers, a Senate and a House of Representatives. And both of them should be based on the number of people that live in each state. Well, at the time, Virginia was the most populous state. So, yeah, of course they would want more representation. They wielded the biggest stick at the time. So, okay, yeah, we'll get the most reps in the House and we'll have the most senators too. As you can imagine, lesser populous states would obviously have an issue with that. Think about this. If you live in a lesser populous state, you will never have your interests met. Okay? You are in by far the minority. There has to be something that gives. Well, enter in those who plan to advocate for the New Jersey plan, which is we're going to have two chambers, the House and the Senate, and every state's going to have the same number of senators and the same number of reps. Well, that completely takes power away from the most populous states. What gives? There has to be something that would drive equality for the most populous states, but also recognize the lesser populated states so that they can have a voice that is effectual. So, you have the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. How can we meet in the middle? How can we compromise? In my personal opinion, the way action happens is when people discuss differences and compromise. Some people see the word compromise as a nasty word. How dare you compromise to those liberals? Oh, those silly conservatives, blah, blah, blah. How dare you? No, folks. As I mentioned in prior videos, America is here from a political standpoint. You have extremists on one side and on the other. Most Americans are somewhere here. You may lean a little bit one way or the other, but most of us are here. Here is where the action happens. This is where real America and real change affects each other. There had to have been some sort of compromise. And in early July, there was just that. There was a great compromise that actually happened in this divided convention. And this great House compromise did several different things. One, it acknowledged the smaller and lesser populated states. It acknowledged the more populous states as well. Okay? It would deem that the United States Senate would have two representatives, two senators from every state, regardless of population. At the time, they would be elected by each individual state legislatures. Okay? Nowadays, they're elected differently. That being said, though, what do you do about the lower chamber, the House of Representatives? You've acknowledged and given strong power to the lesser populated states by way of Senate representation. Well, now the House of Representatives, in that great compromise, now you're going to have states that are more populous have more representation. So Virginia and New York at the time, the more populous states would have more representation in the lower house. Therefore, you acknowledge the more populous states, you acknowledge the lesser populous states, and you give them essentially equal powers in their own different ways. That would be known as a great compromise. But that begs the question, what do we do about slaves? Virginia has more people, largely because it's a slave state. There are a lot of slaves in Virginia in the 1780s. Okay. How does slave representation affect population and therefore representation in the House of Representatives? It was deemed at the time, under the Great Compromise, that for the purposes of population, slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person. I want you to think about that for a second. A human being is counted as 3/5 of a person. Okay. In the context of 2020, we know how awful that sounds. But going back to the 1780s, when you have a 1787 lens and you understand slavery and the picture that it is, that was considered generous at the time. So looking at American history through a 1787 lens, that was the right thing at the time. So since then, things have obviously changed for the better. But it was deemed that for states like Virginia, which had large slave populations, a slave would count as 3/5 of a person, 3/5 of a whole. So, yeah, the upper house, the Senate, would be represented by 2 senators from each state, regardless of population, elected by their state legislatures. Okay? And in July 1787, the convention approved of this. Okay? So, but several other things had to change around that time. You had to draft not just how you're going to have a separation of powers through the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. You need to put it on paper and put it in a framework. Entering that guy from the Virginia Plan, James Madison again. James Madison is an important founding father because, well, he's the dude who wrote most of the Constitution. Okay? The Constitution that frames our government. James Madison wrote most of it. Okay? This guy is incredibly important. So, yeah, he devised the Virginia Plan, and part of it was adopted. But he wrote the Constitution, and he had the question, how could a national government not overstep its bounds? How can we empower our states while also levying taxes and creating a military and having a national central figure presence? How can we balance those things? And in James Madison's brilliant idea, he believed in sovereignty that would be made possible through a system called federalism. You'll definitely want to know that for your exam. Federalism is a system of government that defines sovereignty as being powers between a national federal government and a state government. Federalist system basically is a trickle-up power system to where you have a strong national government, but you empower state and local governments to have true power of voice for regional. The national government could be the overarching government that binds everybody together, but is not meant to be tyrannical. In a truly federalist system, the United States would be a country that would enable its states to have proper power based on the voices of the people in each state. And if the national government needed to intervene in various different things by also levying taxes and committing national affairs and approving such, great. But the states would be left for power. So as not to have a dominating and tyrannical central federal government in the federalist system, you allow the states to have rightful power over their constituents. So you have a separation of powers between a federal government and a state government. That is the model for which we have today. You have Congress, you have our federal systems, but you also have state legislatures and state systems and state governments. Okay? What happens in Texas is not the same as what happens in California. It's not the same in Arizona as it is in Maine. Okay? Regional differences often dictate regional politics, and states should be able to run themselves as such. For example, in the state of Texas, there is no state income tax. California, there is a state income tax. Each state should be able to deem whatever is necessary for themselves. And that basically draws within it also a true system of checks and balances to where you're not going to have one authority being sorely more powerful than another and be this overarching voice that controls everything. You're going to create the 3 main branches of government, which I've mentioned: the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive. So within all of those things, you're going to truly try and frame a system of government. And that system of checks and balances would be unlike what you have in Britain. You have a constitutional monarchy in Britain where they've got the monarch, a king, or in this case Queen Elizabeth now, and Parliament. They also have a prime minister. So what would happen? Should the United States also consider possibly having a king? What would we do about that? Or should we have somebody who can preside over government without being overarchingly tyrannical? How can we craft this executive to be powerful, but not to where he's a tyrant, or she in this case? Okay, we are going to create an executive branch who will be headed by a president. Not a prime minister, not a king, a president who will preside over government. We're going to check this president and give the president equal powers with the legislature, Congress, which is House and the Senate, which are elected based on population, and 2 for each state in the Senate's case. To keep the legislature and the executives both from being tyrannical, you'll have a third system, the judiciary, a Supreme Court, if you will. Okay? You have a Supreme Court and a court system that will be granted equal powers with the executive branch and the legislative branch. They will each have equal powers. Therefore, no one systematic branch of government will be more powerful than one another. The sense of balance that our founding fathers attempted is genius. Okay? Say what you will about slavery at the time or discrimination or anything else of the sort. In the context of the founding fathers in 1787, they had brilliant ideas based on experience, especially since we fought a whole war for our independence. We fought a war because you had a tyrannical parliament and a tyrannical king. We learned lessons from that. How do we create a centralized government that doesn't overstep and doesn't get tyrannical and recognizes every voice? Here's how. You create a system of government in a limited democracy. The United States government is not a true democracy. True democracy in its traditional Greek form is a majority rule. A true democracy can sometimes get tyrannical, and that's one of the fears. The United States would develop a government in the form of a republic. So we are a democratic republic with a framework of government and a system of powers that have true balance and separation between them. Executive, legislative, judiciary. Representation that acknowledges the more populous and those who are less populous and give them an equal opportunity to raise equal voice. That's never been done on the world scale before. That system of government is what makes the United States completely unique on the world scale. That is truly exceptional, that people even had the foresight to even think about having people have a balance of power and attempt at equal say. That had never been done before. Other countries in the world have tried to follow suit and have had some success. Others not so much. But the United States is a truly exceptional country in the fact that we even had people who acknowledged the idea of balance of powers and attempted to come up with some sort of framework to name our government in that balance. Thank you, America. That's another great contribution on a world scale.